get up. And on the way up, we're going to bite a kneecap off, all right? And we're going to stand up, and then it's going to take 2 more shots to knock us down, all right? And on the way up, we're going to take your other kneecap, and we're going to get up, and then it's going to take 3 shots to get us down.
And welcome aboard, Kneecaps Nation. You're locked and loaded again for another edition of Kneecaps for Breakfast. Vince Brogard, that's me. Happy to be joined, as always, by my longtime partner in crime, Phil Byrne. And Phil, we're kind of in an interesting predicament here because we've got so much else going on. We got March Madness that's in full effect. We got the Tigers that are just underway. Major League Baseball in general just underway. We got the Masters coming up. We've got the NBA and the NHL starting to wind down and head towards the playoffs. Yet here we are getting ready to talk about some NFL football because the NFL is a machine that just never seems to want to shut off no matter what part of the year you're sitting in.
Yeah, we're when you're listening to this, it's going to just about be April, and pretty far into the off season. Of course, we know it comes at the end of April here, but we've got some exciting things going on as we're taping this. Justin Verlander coming close to making his Tigers debut outing as once again coming back to the Tigers after several years away. You got March Madness, as you mentioned, and yet here we are talking about the favorite pastime of both of us here in the fall. And again, it seems like sometimes when we don't record these on a Sunday, we get some kind of interesting news and notes coming the next day, which I think sort of happened today.
Yeah, absolutely. So this is kind of something that slipped my mind a little bit. And granted, I mean, I'm not going to air my own dirty laundry out over this podcast, but let's just say my mind has been in a few other areas over the last maybe month or so to where I've lost complete control over the NFL calendar to an extent to that this week is the NFL owners meetings down in Arizona. And that's the meeting where the owners usually participate and the general managers and the head coaches. So usually you're going to get something from somebody. And one day into it, didn't disappoint. And Dan Campbell was the guilty party of a couple of major sound bites. And I guess we can lead off with that here in this edition, Phil, that Campbell kind of tipped his hand a little bit with what the master plan for the offensive line going into 2026 is. And in my mind, it's the right call, Phil. It sounds like the plan is to get Penei Sewell over to left tackle where he belongs, not only as the caliber of player that he is, but also commensurate with his salary. And it's going to be the Larry Borum experience and or whomever they decide to use draft capital on this upcoming draft, or whomever might be a late offseason acquisition for dirt cheap. That's going to be a right tackle situation, but either way, Phil, it seems like Penei Sewell will be the Lions left tackle of the future.
Yeah, it seems that way. And that's essentially what led into Dan Campbell kind of mentioning this. And I think when we were talking about what would the off season look like, I think both of us mentioned potentially making a little bit of a run at some free agents. We got one, I guess, that you could say we kind of made a run at it. Everyone else has been on these 1-year deals. So it seemed like we were waiting on either news or some sort of domino to fall. And it seems like even if it was internal, not by way of an extension or anything, this was certainly one domino to go ahead and fall. Penei Sewell does not go ahead and join Jared Goff in restructuring his contract or anything like that. He is going to be very handsomely paid still as a tackle in this league. And again, I think if you just had some sort of plug-in player over on that left side, but you were keeping Penei Sewell at right, I think you would start to kind of raise some concerns, especially just on kind of how poor the pass protection was last year, So I think it's the logical move. I think Penei Sewell, really since day one of being here with this team, has sort of taken on more leadership roles, over time, to where I think you could make the argument that he is probably maybe not the first person that people go to for sound bites, but he is definitely a lead by example kind of guy. And um, I know if I'm Jared Goff, that's the guy who I would want protecting my blind side over any other available option right now. So, um, you know, for me, Vince, and I'll kind of throw this back to you and where you want to take this. Um, we just found out about today, and we're almost here in April. But to me, this seems like something that has been in the works for a while.
Absolutely. So, which leads me to the question, why now in the final week of March is anything about this being rolled out by the Lions? Is there maybe a little bit of trepidation on their part of how quickly is he going to be able to pick up left tackle for being away for it for so long? Is it maybe the fact that he would try to shake the Lions down for more money on the back end or something like that? It's like, hey, when we did this contract, it was at right tackle. Taylor Decker wasn't on his way out the door when we did this. So maybe they were
Right.
concerned, hey, we're going to want some more money if this move to left tackle is going to be a thing. Maybe there were some behind the scenes things that needed to be worked out behind closed doors before something like this was more or less made public. I'm not sure. In any case, though, I do think it's the right move for the Lions organization moving forward. And part of what Campbell's overall theme was in his remarks at day one of the owners' meetings is that the next priority for this organization is to get younger. And we saw what happened with, like, the Red Wings, for instance, all those years back, where they suddenly became the oldest team in all of hockey and they really needed to do a hard reset. Now, we didn't realize that the hard reset 7 or 8 years later would still be happening in continuum, but that's a whole different discussion for a whole different podcast. But it sounds to me like that's going to really be the focus of this team as they move forward. And if you think about it, Phil, it really does double down on the approach of draft, develop, resign, which we've just beaten into oblivion over the last however many dozens of podcasts we've brought that
Yeah.
up in. But in any case, that's pretty much the way they intend to get younger. And you look at the critical positions of leader of the offensive line, left tackle. You get your obvious leader of the offensive line in Penei Sewell. You get them into the most important position. And he basically called out Jet Campbell as essentially the leader of the defense. Green dot on the back of the helmet, middle linebacker, essentially saying the quiet part out loud that we intend to throw large sums of money at him when the time and occasion is right. And he basically called Sewell and Jet Campbell basically the leaders of this team heading into the next. I hate to use the word generation because that maybe
Yeah.
implies a wide range of time, but the next little era of Detroit Lions football, those are your two guys.
Yeah, it certainly seems that way. Um, it is still interesting, even though Campbell has that green dot. I think he is a very quiet leader, whereas I think like Hutch is probably the one that maybe has the wider appeal. You see him in a lot of commercials and things like that. So, I mean, that's something to keep an eye on. What I find really interesting though about like the timing of these comments and everything is that Taylor Decker um, got with Justin Rogers of formerly of the Detroit News and kind of vocalized some things on his exit with the Lions. And I don't think this was set in timed fashion about that. But I think they wanted to be very, very deliberate in terms of because I think it is directly tied to another where basically the idea of not bringing Decker back is related to putting Penei Sewell over at that left tackle spot. Probably, as we've seen free agency for the most part play out here, you would assume, unless they again really, really like Larry Borum, um, that they're going to go get a guy in the first or second round and go play over on the right side, and kind of go from there. What's crazy about this is these are things that we have talked about when we put together like this offseason plan of like, could the Lions potentially take Penei Sewell and put him on the left side there? Um, but in my opinion, it seemed like once Decker said he was gone, this is something that the Lions already put forth in motion. That Penei Sewell was going to be that left tackle. And then when he tried to come back, they were like, hey, we didn't think you'd be coming back. Almost like, you know, they had a spare room that they were renting out, and the person was coming back to try to get their room back, and was like, someone's got your room now. Sorry about that. You're gonna have to go try, renting somewhere else. So
Oh,
it's
by the way, we
interesting.
changed the locks.
We changed the locks. Yeah, yeah. So we don't have the money for you. But yeah, it's just interesting. I think it's all timed together. I think the Lions just kind of release information or feel comfortable speaking on things at a certain time. And I think where you look at like the first round, I mean, consider some of the guys that I thought the Lions were taking a look at in the first round, and three of them were offensive tackles that you could arguably plug in at where they're picking, as day one starters.
But now that changes the calculus a little bit because we more or less know that Sewell's going to be the guy at left tackle. And from a
Yeah,
draftability standpoint, it's much easier to expect a guy that you're selecting in the draft to step in and take over that right tackle position
yeah.
immediately, as opposed to there being more of a learning curve with the left
Oh yeah,
tackle. So now all of a
yeah.
sudden, you're looking at more options on the table as we head into April's draft.
That is 100% correct. Yeah, and I think, I identified really that now I guess it's right tackle spot, and the other defensive end spot opposite Hutch is really, I think, the two moves that you could do in the first round that have the most options and players for you.
We're going to talk about this as we get into the latter part of the offseason, as we start to break down positions and personnel and
Yeah.
everything like that once the roster gets more or less finalized. Do you have any concern, though, whatsoever about Sewell's ability to regain or reteach himself the left tackle position? Because the last time he really did it for an extended amount of time was when he was out at Oregon. And if you think about it, it might not seem like a terribly long time ago, but you're going back 6 to 7 years now, the last
Yeah.
time he's played that position in consistent fashion. And a lot of times football is like riding a bike, and other times it's not. That's why you go out there and practice however many days a week over the course of the season and beyond to keep your skill set and your fundamentals where they need to be. Any drop off that you anticipate with Sewell's ability to regain his footing at the left tackle?
No, but I also think like why I'm trying to tie this all into when Decker said he was stepping away, that that's when they needed to make that sudden move and say, hey, as you start gearing up for the offseason and putting in the offseason workouts, just know we want you to play that left side. So all the muscle memory, all the alignment and everything like that you are doing, you're gonna have to go ahead and flip. I 110% believe that he will be ready day one and that he will be a more than competent left tackle. Um, like, don't anticipate, the most flawless first season playing that spot. Because I think even the most dedicated person in the offseason and being in the best shape of their life and going through this, that, and the other thing, there is nothing that is going to replicate the actual in game with live whistle, live officiating, live opponent work that he will get, and I'm assuming it won't be in preseason, that he will get starting in week one. Like, I anticipate there's going to be some rust. I anticipate we're probably going to get some false starts, and things like that, or some timing will be off. But, um,
Although Sewell didn't
I
have a great season in 2025, and even by his
no,
own admission, he knows he could do much better. So you know that he's going to be on a redemption tour of sorts
Sure.
heading into 2026 anyway. So maybe you get those two elements to offset, and he winds up having a pretty solid campaign coming up.
Yeah, I can see that. But I just think that um by the time we get into the heart of the schedule, I anticipate he'll be fantastic over there.
So we will wait and see how the things play out in the offseason as far as the development of Sewell getting back on the horse as far as left tackle goes. But that's some of the big news out of Campbell's comments from the NFL owners' meetings that are taking place this week in Arizona. Another interesting tidbit that came out of that as well is that Dan Campbell has made the decision, presumably in conjunction with some of the Lions front office members, that the Lions will not be participating in joint practices this preseason slash training camp. So that's a pretty noticeable departure from what the Lions have done all along. The previous 4 years, the Lions have participated in those joint practices. And basically, in Campbell's own words, he said that the first 2 years that they did it, which ironically enough were two of the Lions' most successful seasons in recent memory, he said that they were phenomenal experiences and they got a lot of great things out of them. They were able to really learn about where they were at because of going up against a different team that's not yourself. And there was just a lot of value that he saw in those. And then in contrast, the last 2 seasons, he said they really didn't get much of anything out of them. And it was more or less kind of a big waste, in that he thought that if they would have just had a regular team practice in each of those scenarios, that he thought it would have been more beneficial long term for the Lions. What do you think, Phil? Do you think that short term and long term, do you think that the Lions deciding to break off from the probably more popular use of your time in the preseason, which is these joint practices, do you think that's in the best interest of this franchise short term and long term?
Well, I'm going to kind of take that question and kind of spin it a little bit here because I think some of those joint practices depends on who you're playing. I think if you have guys that you want to make your team that are borderline practice squad, you don't want to give another team's coaches the opportunity to see these guys firsthand in practice and perform. And I can't remember who it is, but I want to say there was like a player or two that we had that I can't even remember who we were practicing against, but ended up on their team or something like that. The bigger question at play here, if I'm being completely honest, how many years in a row have we seen the Lions have a rusty start? And I think it goes back to how the team is not preparing in practice because we know they practice hard under Dan Campbell,
Almost too
but it is
hard.
what actually happens in these preseason games where you had like literally the what entire yeah, no, I think it was literally in the entire first line of the depth chart, not even like Lodge, a single minute, um, preseason time. And I just don't know if that's super effective with the layoff that you've got in between, when those preseason games start and when the regular season starts. Um, Listen, I don't want these guys getting hurt. I don't think they need to play a half, but definitely like when you talk about those starters and trying to get rid of any rep, like going a series or two, I think would be very beneficial. And that's really the point of it that I would like to see them adjust to, but we don't have those answers yet. And again, because it's kind of limited media access at these things,
Yeah.
I feel like we're probably not going to get the answer to until actually training camp starts.
I don't think so, but I do think that is at least the implication that you're going to start to see a little bit of a shift in philosophy of what are we going to do with these
Sure.
top lines on both offense and defense in these preseason games, especially maybe game number one and game number two. Are we going to start seeing a little bit more of Jared Goff or St. Brown or Hutchinson or some of these guys? Because otherwise, you're not seeing them until that first full weekend in September.
Yeah.
So I think there's definitely some correlation to rust, and you can definitely say there could possibly be a correlation to injuries. Why we've been seeing so many injuries, because you're just not seeing that natural lead in. You're going from whatever you're doing in practice, which you can say you're going balls to the wall, but in reality, You just said it yourself in a different conversation, Phil. There's no substitute to the in-game speed, the in-game action. And whatever you're doing at these joint practices, yeah, you might be going 85, 90, but the only time you're really truly going 100 is in game settings. And if you're going from whatever you're doing prior to that up until week 1, when all of a sudden, boom, you're right in the you're right in that bull ring there. There's nothing you can really do otherwise to prepare yourself for it, other than just getting into a game. Period. And
Yeah,
that's where participating in actual preseason games, in my mind, is better than just one of these joint practices where everything is so controlled. The coaches are right there and they can blow a play dead at any second. At least in a preseason game, assuming that you're facing functioning human beings on the other side, you're still playing an NFL game by NFL rules, with the timing, and the whistle doesn't blow until the play's over and all this other stuff, and the coaches are at their normal places, and everything just kind of feels, as from a flow perspective, from a game speed perspective, at least somewhat replicates an actual game more so than a joint practice does. That's my opinion.
yeah, and again, like I think it's worth having a conversation over, and you know, I think there are some things that, based on these comments, you feel like Dan wants to maybe tweak about how he does things. Um, because again, what a bad taste in our mouth from last season. And especially like when we look at the roster, not much has really changed so much. Like okay, cool, we got a better center than we had last year, but pretty much everything else that we brought on this team's on a 1-year deal. So um, you know, draft, develop, and resign. That's kind of what's going on here. But yeah, we'll have to see really as we get closer to training camp. I think anything gets updated there.
So we also heard from Brad Holmes this past week, and the biggest thing to take away from him was, of course, this is the elephant in the room conversation here, is what in the blue heck are you going to do with the defensive line? And his answer was one that kind of irked me a little bit as a longtime Lions supporter. And again, I'm more or less kind of paraphrasing his own words here, but it was essentially, we knew going into this offseason that we had to place a priority on one of two position groups, either the offensive line or the defensive line. We decided to more or less put all our eggs in the offensive line basket to get that unit more or less back to where it needs to be. And we knew that whatever position group that we did not choose was going to be more or less left untouched. And we decided that it was in our best interest to roll with improving the offensive line, and the only thing they really had money left over for was to bring DJ Wanham into the fold, and that's really how it's going to be. So, your thoughts on the Lions' decisions on that front?
Okay, so there's like a couple things to unfold there because part of roster building is trying to go ahead and navigate that cap and where it will be years from now. And I understand, like, I think championship teams are won in the draft. I would put more preference on developing through the draft than I would free agency. I think a lot of teams have money to burn through and use it unwisely in free agency. I can think of a lot more free agents that were signed to big deals that didn't work out than those that did. Um, if you have a player hitting the open market, maybe there's a reason why they're hitting the open market. But when I look at who some of the best general managers are in football, they are thinking outside of the box ways to improve their team. I think of a Howie Roseman and the way that he goes ahead and approaches not just looking at one unit that needs to get better and going all in, improving that entire, whole look of the team. And it's not just done through the draft. It's not just done through free agency, but it's also done through trades from time to time, acquiring players. Big into knowing when to resign players, when to letting them go. I think about the Baltimore Ravens, who I think has also had a very, very good roster over the last several years. They made the decision not to bring back Tyler Linderbaum, getting into a massive contract for a center, and they decided to use those assets elsewhere. Not every move that Brad Holmes is going to go ahead and try to keep a player and try to get them into a deal that is going to make sense 2 years from now for where the cap is going is going to pay off. Eventually, guys are going to get old. Eventually, guys are going to get hurt. Eventually, guys aren't going to perform at the same level as when they were pre-contract. Like that just always happens. Unfortunately, the sad part about it is Brad had what, three really, 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 really good drafts in a row.
Yes.
That helps set the tenor. It helps set what this core is.
And really put him at the very top in the court of public opinion with Lion fan.
Exactly. But like, you should never feel hostage to not being able to make moves. And we have literally to no cap flexibility. We cannot go ahead and address some issues that have been lingering on this team for several years. Yes, we did sign a DJ Reed as a replacement cornerback. I think he was probably considered by most to be the top corner on the market.
But if you compared it to what Carlton Davis was, you're pretty much talking a wash. There's no improvement whatsoever.
And Carlton Davis was on a more probably cap-friendly deal for what he ended up signing for. That's the part of things that you start to lose me when you use that kind of analysis in terms of how you're building the team. To me, this draft, if this is all we're really going to do, with the exception of Cade Mays being our center, he's got to hit this out of the park. I think he needs to go ahead and find at least two immediate starters, or starters that are going to start in these position groups about halfway through the season and be contributors. Because if last year's draft, if Isaac Tesla is the biggest contributor, Tyleik Williams, like, we're still not really sure what happened there. We know Tate Ratledge is going to be a starter. I think he's got decent upside, but like, he's got to improve. The year before, not a great look. I think there were several reaches in there. Terrion Arnold now has all the off the field stuff surrounding him this offseason. I think he's got to hit this out of the park just for this Lions team to feel comfortable about the way that we are building this thing out long term. I think for his job security, and like, if I'm Dan Campbell and I just look at the guys we brought in, like, hey, there might be a couple, gems out there, of maybe some teams making some poor cap decisions and not bringing them back. But like, as a Lions fan, it's really, really hard to feel overly optimistic about how free agency went.
Yeah, and what bothers me the most is, okay, so I understand that the offensive line was probably, when this thing was humming at its best, the offensive line was the unit that was the best, that was the most solid, the most locked down. I understand that it's kind of taken a hard left a little bit since the Lions were really at their zenith. And it is probably in the team's best interest to really work on getting that unit, more so than any other, back up and running to where it should be. I get that. But as we talked about maybe 3 weeks to a month ago, we kind of mapped out different avenues to where the Lions could free up some salary cap space by stretching stuff out over years, or doing the Bobby Bonilla approach or something quirky like that. And the Lions, to their credit, did restructure Jared Goff's deal. However, if you look at it based on how you and I kind of described it versus how it actually went down, the Lions actually kind of left a little bit of money on the table by not maybe tweaking it to the full extent they possibly could have. They didn't touch Sewell's contract like you mentioned, Phil. They didn't touch St. Brown's contract. So all I'm hearing is Brad saying, hey, we did X, Y, and Z, and we were completely bum-ass broke, except we had just enough money in our pocket to go out and grab DJ Wanham, and that's all we can afford, guys. Sorry. So you mean to tell me that, okay, we did X, Y, and Z, and you're selling me that we did everything we could, and now all that's left is DJ Wanham. I mean, come on. I was born at night, but it wasn't last night, Phil. Come on now.
Well, so here's my take on it too. Okay, so I mentioned just a couple moments ago, I think he really has to hit this draft out of the park. I think he needs 2 starters. As we sit right now, again, I think whatever we do in the first round, I think the opportunity is there that that person can play right away. Second round, we got to do the same thing. So I don't. I know this is not a super top heavy draft, and the strength of this draft is going to be where the Lions are picking at 17, probably all the way to mid second round. Um, but eventually, those picks start to taper off. So then we're looking at, okay, well then, do the Lions actually need to trade back up a little bit from that second round pick too? And then all of a sudden, you're talking about giving up other assets. So when you are going all in, but you're still not picking like towards the tippy top of the draft, um, it becomes a little harder to do. Teams have been able to do it before. And for me, I'm still going to give Brad the benefit of the doubt when it comes to the draft, knowing where he's come from, looking at like the Rams and how they've rebuilt the defense, it seems several times over. And they've done so in a much quicker fashion than the Lions, mind you. That's Les Snead. He's one of the best that's out there. Um, but like the secondary and the concerns that we have with the safety spot, who's actually going to be healthy back there playing and starting week 1? Cornerback, Terrion Arnold. Is he going to be suspended for a couple games if something goes south with that? Is DJ Reed going to be healthy? We have a ton of questions on that defense as it is currently constructed. And to be honest, to say you're going all in on the offensive line and okay, you got a big deal to a center. Can we sit here and confidently say that like we believe that what's his face Scruggs and Larry Borum are
Do they make this team better?
Do they make the team?
Okay, so we know that
So
Sewell moving over to left tackle, at least long term, is going to make that position better. I don't think
yeah,
center can get any worse than what it was last year with Glasgow. So I think getting Cade
no, I
Mays in
think
there
Mays
is
will be
going to
good.
help,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
definitely is going to be an improvement in pass protection. Ironically, it's going to take a hard left and run block, but that's another discussion for another day. I believe Ratledge has a right to get better heading into year 2. I think the same could be said for Mahogany if they decide to hold steady at the guard positions. And then I guess whatever you get from those 2 guys that you mentioned, we'll see. But I think there's still a lot more hope in there than there is certainty of this group is going to be markedly better than it was in 2025. And I'm just not ready to commit to that just yet.
no, yeah, and I think there are a lot of question marks. I know we spoke pretty highly of the pass protection element of Cade May's game, but I think if this team struggles to run the ball, that's where we're going to start to have some issues. We know Jameer Gibbs can be a threat receiving, but if we are having issues running the ball, um, again, like that's going to make this team one dimensional. And we haven't seen that in a number of years where this team's, becomes one dimensional. So we'll have to see. I just think I love having the access that it seems like Brad and Dan are speaking at things and kind of going on podcasts and talking a little bit.
And to be fair, you
Especially
know that whatever comes out of their mouth is the truth. They don't play coy about just about anything.
no, I think they're pretty authentic to the core, about what they're talking about. But as a Lions fan, or a Lions fan listening to this podcast, um, I don't know. Like, I just don't think the optimism is quite where it has been at this point in previous off seasons.
Well, and I think speaking as a Lions fan, we need to be sold on the fact that this team is doing everything they possibly can to contend for a Super Bowl. And we were this close to going to a Super Bowl until they decided to choke away a 17-point lead in the Bay Area a few years ago. And then they followed that up with a phenomenal regular season despite all those injuries. And then they went out there and just completely,
Yeah.
I'm not going to use,
Laid
insert
an egg.
defecation down body part here. And then last year was last year. So it seems like it's just gone from good to bad to worse. And I think as Lions fan, we need to be sold on the fact that they're doing everything they can to get back into being a top 3-4 franchise in the league. And I just don't know that we've seen it yet.
Yeah.
Not
So
obviously,
again,
at least.
the fact that we're sitting here, getting into April and basically pining all of our hopes and improvements on the draft, it's a little telling.
Yeah.
It's a little telling.
Yep, for sure. All right, Phil. It was nice to have some fresh content to discuss the day
Yeah.
of instead of it being 6 days after the fact. So we, for once, timed it perfectly. So
Yeah.
that's a win for the Kneecaps for Breakfast team right there. And we will quit while we're ahead, Phil. That's going to do it
Yeah.
for this episode of Kneecaps for Breakfast. We appreciate you taking time out of your busy spring breaks or schedules to tune in and listen to some football chit-chat with us. Phil and I are going to be right back here, same time, same place next week. You're not going to want to miss it. We're Phil Byrne across the way, Vince Progar saying good morning. Go Lions, forward down the field, over and out.